reminder for me to start recording this one. The mics are muted. Please unmute and use video during the Q&A and try to use chat for questions. We are going to try to make this as interactive as possible. And so we will have opportunities where we'll be asking you to unmute and participate and be an active participant. So if you could just sort of follow along with that, we would certainly appreciate it. The more interactive we can make it, the better. And we will also be keeping an eye on the chat though. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in there and we'll try to respond on a periodic basis. And then Brian Raisin added in a listening tip about using some tactile object if you want to keep your attention and not multitask. The last session I was in, someone was riding a bike in front of their computer. So whatever it does, whatever works for you, we hope that you're an active participant with us today. So with that, I wanted to welcome you to Online Ripple Effects Mapping, exploring the benefits and challenges of conducting a virtual REM evaluation. My name is Rebecca Ciro. I am an associate professor and evaluation specialist with Washington State University. I'm joined today by Deborah Hansen, who is a professor and extension director in Stevens County. Carrie Backman is also a director in another county. Unfortunately, she was not able to join us today, but we'll be talking a little bit about how she's made use of ripple effects mapping in a community development setting. And then Lori Higgins is with us as well, and she is a professor and community development extension specialist with the University of Idaho. So we appreciate each one of you joining us today. We wanted to talk to the group about ripple effects mapping in a virtual setting. Given the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure many of you were faced with the same challenges we were with the stay-at-home orders and the change to not being able to collect things online. Or I'm sorry, not being able to collect information or do community development programming online. And so when we were faced with this, we realized that we needed to shift gears and move towards collecting data that had always been done in person in a very fun and engaging way, instead doing it virtually. And so we're here today to talk to you about how we figured this process out. We're going to provide a brief overview of ripple effects mapping. We'll give you the opportunity to both visually see ripple effects mapping online. We have a couple of examples to show, and then we're going to ask you to participate in the process and do some appreciative inquiry mapping with us. And then we are going to talk about the differences between scheduling and working in a live in-person REM versus a virtual one. We'll talk about what it looks like in the community, do some reporting, and then leave some time, hopefully at the end, for questions and comments. So, do you ever feel like this after conducting an evaluation? I'm an evaluation specialist. I feel like this all the time. However, Deborah Hansen is a colleague online with us today, and she often jokes and laughs that evaluation to her is not quite as exciting as it is to me. This was an in-person ripple effects mapping that we did with a group in Washington State. And they were so excited at the end of this evaluation process that they were high-fiving each other in front of the map. And so we're here to talk through this process, whether it's a virtual high five or an in-person one. We believe that ripple effects mapping is exciting and engaging and allows people the opportunity to collect information in a participatory way. So it is a participatory evaluation technique. And one of the key pieces of ripple effects mapping is that it's used to understand both the intended and unintended results of a program or a project. Oftentimes when we collect evaluation, we have very specific questions that steer us in a direction. So we're collecting data, and the questions we ask we do our best to ensure that they get us the data we're looking for. However, what's interesting about ripple effects mapping is that because it's participatory and open-ended, it allows us to collect information about things we don't necessarily know or expect to find out. One thing that is especially exciting about ripple effects mapping is that it's beneficial to both the participant and to the evaluator. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have a lot to cover today, but we did want to point out that as a participant, when you're doing a ripple effects mapping, whether it's virtual or in person, you have the opportunity to engage in an event or a session that allows you to actually witness emerging patterns and trends that are happening within your program or your project. We often find groups feel very positive and hopeful when they actually see the results unfolding in front of them. It allows groups to sort of connect to a larger purpose, as opposed to a lot of times when we're working in community development, especially, we get caught up in the weeds. We're doing day in and day out, we're working really hard, and we don't necessarily see the bigger picture. Ripple effects mapping allows people to kind of take a step back and are able to see everything that's accomplished. As a result, you get some reflection and growth in the groups that you speak with. And overall, it's fun and engaging and very visual. And we have found a way to make it visual, both obviously in person, the way we've been doing it for many years, but we found a way to make it visual for those virtual participants as well. In addition to the participant benefits, there are a whole host of evaluator benefits. Most especially, it collects stories and impacts from your participants in a way that we haven't found other methods as successful. It works really well with complex and evolving work, and it helps when outcomes are difficult to conceptualize or measure with other types of methods. So it ends up being a very useful and powerful tool to put in your evaluation toolbox. It can be used at different times, mid-program, post-program, and it provides an ongoing group validation of results. So with all that being said, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Lori, who is going to talk us through about where it's worked before and give us some visuals.
It's been a couple of years now since the field guide came out, but there are a lot of case studies in the field guide. I just put the link in the chat to where you can find this, and you can download it for free, but you can also buy a bound copy from them. And I think, Deborah, is it $20 or $10?
$10.88.
$10.88. Well worth it, because you will spend more than that just printing costs if you print it yourself. So and they do a nice job of binding it. So it's been used in so many places in different countries for different programs and projects now. And we'll be talking about some of them. You know, we're hearing so far in this conference a lot about food systems, and it's really great for food systems because food systems tend to have these rippling effects out into the community that are not often predictable. So we'll be talking about one example, but there are just lots of uses for this in all kinds of community work. So this is an example of a written map and what my handwriting looks like, which will probably make you be glad that Rebecca is typing in to a digital map instead of me writing when we get to the part where we're going to have you do a little exercise in ripple effects mapping. This is this is an example of a live mapping, and we've been doing some ripple effects mapping training virtually over the last year and a half, and what we've been finding in doing the training is that it's really helpful when participants can watch ripple effects mapping happen before we try to explain it. So we've got a couple of examples. We'll show this short video of the Peninsula Food Coalition. You'll get to see Deborah mapping live in action. And you get to see her jumping up and down, which you probably won't see her do today. But when she's in person, she's pretty animated and fun. Not that she's not fun virtually, but she just doesn't do as much jumping up and down and talking with her hands. So we'll watch this short video, and then we'll actually do an exercise where we'll have you be participants in ripple effects mapping, and then we'll go from there and talk in more depth about comparing the differences between a live and a virtual event.
I can see some of them are like this. Oh, let me talk. I want to make sure that everybody on the front row gets this. She's front row too. She's we could have pulled up another chair.
Ripple mapping is about telling stories. Telling stories is a really powerful way for people to relate their experience, for others to jump in and understand that experience.
Because of the relationship with the Peninsula Food Coalition, I started doing some initial recipe demos at the Port Angeles and Squim Food Bank.
Because it's participatory, because it's creative, because it's visual, allows people to come together and really tease out the far-reaching positive benefits that their work has had in a community. Ripple mapping starts out where the facilitator asks the participants to engage in some appreciative inquiry, to pair off in groups or pairs, to ask a series of questions that get people in the storytelling mode. And from there, they come back together, and the facilitator starts to ask people to tell those stories, asking prompts that say, so what about that? What's the impact of that? And all the while mapping it out on a large scale so that everyone can see it and participate and jump in and add and build on. After this participatory component, that huge map is taken and coded. The stories that we're told are organized into different frameworks that trace impacts from their beginning to their end, where you're measuring what are the social impacts of this work, what are the financial impacts of this work, where in the community are they having an effect.
This is the moment when I go, maybe it won't work this time. It feels like stepping off a cliff. I mean, we have this big, huge, big piece of white paper up here, stories in your brain, and now we're going to try to make sense of it.
Deborah Hansen and Rebecca Serro with WCU Extension and Lori Higgins with the University of Idaho have taken the ripple mapping technique and refined it and actually developed a manual that takes groups from start to finish through this process. The beauty of ripple mapping is that you can use it at all scales. You can use it as simply a participatory team building effort where people are taking a pause in their work and looking back at what have we accomplished so far and what are the impacts. Or you can take it all the way through the sort of data coding aspects of it to really get a sense of where the impacts are clustered. The Peninsula Food Coalition started about 3 years ago with two very forward-thinking directors of our two biggest food banks in Clown County, the Port Angeles Food Bank and the Squim Food Bank, bringing a group of people together to really talk about how we can interface and collaborate in our food assistance work.
Northwest Harvest started Growing Connections so that we could help our partner food banks get more fresh produce to their clients. That is the goal of the program. And our first Growing Connections meeting was a result of the connection, obviously with our partner programs, but also with the two Rotary First Harvest Vista, because we were cohort members and there was already a lot of work on the ground.
The work of the coalition includes gleaning, it includes farm to food bank purchases, it includes processing the abundance of food that's coming in through that gleaning program. It includes troubleshooting the transportation and distribution aspects of it. It includes networking with local tribes to ensure that healthy food is getting to the farthest reaches of our county. We've been able to garner funding resources. The goal of our work is to really share resources and leverage resources.
Gleaning was our first success.
Yeah.
And that's where we first realized the potential for how we could work together, and that could mean the logistics of transportation, that could mean bulk buying, that could mean, you know, expanding capacity. And it was our first sort of aha moment of what we could do better and more for one another.
WSU Extension brings a really important component because of our SNAP Ed programming and because of our gleaning. And it's really through the gleaning and this abundance of fresh produce that has become more available in the food banks that it's led to this really larger conversation around how can we interface with local farms and really use the issue of food access and food security as actually an economic development tool for our community.
One of the things I'm most proud about is the work that we've done to really prioritize finding ways to purchase fresh, locally sourced produce. And the reason that that's been really important is because it's caused all sorts of other amazing things to happen from there.
What do the relationships with our local farmers look like? How can community food security contribute to not only increased food access for people in need, but in really supporting and growing our local farm and food production base?
What was the magic that got people?
To me, it was the relationships. I mean, we could ask our tribal food bank person here why she joined the coalition. And
being united to serve all of Colum and Jefferson County and making sure that people that needed food got it, whether they were tribal citizens or food bank citizens.
But you know, Christy, what I remember you saying also was that while there had been coalitions in the past, different types of coalitions, you saw this as something that was for real. Mm-hmm. And it was the fact that it was for real and, you know, actually doing things that really encouraged people to come and to continue to come.
The ideas that were forged between all the participating agencies were definitely long-standing ideas that were for a collective.
All this great work is happening through the coalition, but perhaps most importantly, it's the relationships and the trust that we've built that allow us to really come together to find solutions in our community.
Beautiful handwriting. All right, so I think from that you can see not only sort of how cool it is to do ripple effects mapping, and but you can see how in person people are feeding off of each other. You know, you can see the heads nodding and people are thinking, and you know, when you don't have all of those cues, those social cues, it definitely is not the same doing it virtually. Ideally, you will have everybody on video, everybody with a camera, but that has never happened. The entire pandemic and all the ripple mapping I've done, I've never had every person be able to be visible at least some point during the ripple mapping. So you really don't get a lot of those cues. Now that said, we've had some really incredible experiences ripple mapping, and you know, as Deborah says, hair on the back of the neck, you know, going up and crying, and I cry, Deborah cries, we cry a lot when we do ripple mapping, because you do get some really sort of beautiful, incredible stories that people tell of transformation and change, and it's hard not to be affected by that. So with that said, what we thought we would do now is give you a taste of ripple effects mapping virtually. And how we're going to do this is we're going to send you off into some breakout rooms. You'll be sort of randomly assigned, and we'll give you just a couple of minutes to talk about this question. How has living through the pandemic affected your family, community, work, or you in a positive way. We know that the pandemic has been extremely difficult in a lot of ways, in professional, personal ways, in myriad ways. And at the same time, I think there's been a lot of positive things that have come out of it. And this is the approach we always take in ripple effects mapping. So we know, and you're all community development people, so you know this, but that you learn a lot more from, you know, your strengths and what you've achieved than you learn from focusing on what didn't work. If you focus on the problems and what didn't work, you're kind of learning what you shouldn't do. But if you're focusing on what has worked, where you've had strength, where you've found ways to innovate and change in a positive way, then those are lessons that you can take and go forward, move forward in your personal, professional life, in your project or program. So that's why in ripple effects mapping, when we have this opportunity for folks to go off into either to the side of the room to have a conversation in person or in Zoom into breakout rooms, we have them focus on a set of positive questions. Normally, we would kind of break this question up into 2, 3, 4 questions that are worded in slightly different ways, because these are just guiding questions. And what we want them to do is to be aids in helping participants recall experiences and knowledge that they gained. And so if you have several questions that are worded in different ways and asking about slightly different kinds of impacts, how has your community changed versus how have you been changed personally, then that just helps people recall the breadth of experience that they've had with the project or program. So we will, and usually when we do this, we take what we'll pop into your breakout rooms and ask you if you are all set and you're or if you have any questions to help you get started. Not very often have we had people struggling, but sometimes there may be some kind of a technical glitch or a lack of familiarity with Zoom, so people aren't aware, say, that the question has been posted into the chat, or they didn't get the questions that are sent out ahead of time, didn't get those printed out or have no way to view them. So they might, you know, need to have the questions put in the chat and, you know, just get a little bit of guidance. So we pop into the breakout sessions at least once, and then we give folks a warning when it's almost time to come back to the larger group, and just so they're not you know, rudely jerked out of their breakout rooms, and do have a little bit of warning. So with that,
Are you ready, Lori?
I think we're ready to go into breakout rooms. And again, just come up with an idea or two. We won't be able to capture everybody's ideas when we come back. When we will capture this in a mind map, but we'll get 4, 5, 6 examples as much as we have time for.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the example, or I'm sorry, start the breakout rooms. The question is located in the chat box as well, so you'll be able to see that. You'll be in rooms with 3 to 4 people. We have about 5 to 6 minutes, so not a lot of time. Hopefully each person has the opportunity to share at least a short story, and then we'll be coming back together afterwards. You'll get about a 60-second warning before you're dumped back into the main room. It looks like almost everybody is back. So we might have had a couple people drop off. Let me check the rooms.
Now, typically, and I'll make a process note here, I would have in front of me a list of everybody's name and what group they were in. And then as I'm calling names or people are sharing their stories, I'm checking off their name on my list, just to make sure that I'm watching time and that I'm going to get around to everybody, that everybody has a chance to share before our time is up. So what I'm going to do here instead, because our time is super short, is I'm just going to call on a couple of rooms and have one volunteer from your room share a story. So let's go to room number 1. Somebody from room number 1 share a story, please.
Yes, this is Ellen Rowe, and my story is that for years I've been involved with the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, and it's a group that gets together and is concerned about the Northeast Kingdom and the issues here. And every year they do a day at the Capitol. And so people drove to the Capitol and they met with their local legislators. And because of the pandemic, nobody drove. Instead, we did it virtually. They had 5 times the participants at that meeting. So 5 times the voices were heard by those local legislators. And I'm pretty sure that they're going to continue to do it just for that increase in voice, increase in involvement that they had.
That's great. So this is a professional and a social benefit. And you say that that they may be continuing to do virtual because there was such a good turnout?
For the reach. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's something, we've heard oftentimes, and actually been doing some work with farmers and ranchers who especially have been benefited by moving to Zoom association meetings because they don't have to leave the farm. And usually the farms are located far away from where meetings are held, so it reduces a lot of travel time. So that's great. How about, thank you, Ellen. Room number 3.
I think that was our room, Linda. So I guess I'll go. So mine is more individually. So most of the time I am not a creative person. I go against creativity, but I like to do into numbers and economics and local government. But I kind of wanted to be more, push myself into being thinking more creatively. And so I decided I would start painting. And from just like painting by numbers, and I've done 6 to 7 different paint by numbers, which I've given away some and kept others. But then I took that into my more my work world, and I'm being more innovative and more creative in my Zoom presentations. So I think that's a little bit that had pushed myself into my work world too.
Great. And have you, what kind of other personal benefits have you noticed in terms of just relaxation or?
So yeah, relaxation. I did a lot of puzzles, but it's more relaxation, just more creativity and seeing different colors and things together that I would not normally put together. And then it's just a way to give gifts that maybe it's more personal than buying something that is already made. It's more of a handmade gift.
Great. Yeah. And that's really interesting. Are you expanding your social network to be more arts related as well as some of your other interests?
So yeah, I was did an Indiana Arts Commission grant. I was on a grant panel, so just I got to read all their applications and give them suggestions, and so learning into more performing arts, visual arts, those kind of things.
Great. So if anybody else has had a similar experience, if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat, that would be great. Same with the professional experience that Ellen shared, just maybe stakeholders or groups that you've worked with, or communities discovering that, you know, Zoom can be very helpful and being more willing to incorporate that into their way of operating in the world going forward. And we just wanted to do a couple of examples since we don't have a ton of time. We're going to leave it there, but if you wouldn't mind just popping a couple more examples in the chat so people can see the other kinds of things that we would include there. And then probably, you know, if we were doing this with say a community or a group of kids or something, you know, we would go back and we would probably categorize them in terms that I've been using here, you know, and sort of personal creativity, expanding socially in some way by linking with different groups online, or finding that professionally you can access more people virtually for some things than you could in person. So really thinking about incorporating that going forward. And then you saw Rebecca typing into Xmind, which is the software that we've used for a long time. And this is an example of the map, just, you know, kind of the raw, unedited map. And later in the presentation, I'll come back and I'll show you what I ended up doing with this map, because you can add things to it to make it tell a story in maybe more of a compelling way, and be something that you could even present, say, to stakeholders or to a community, or you know, in a professional presentation. At this point,
so we wanted to take the opportunity to do a little bit of a comparison between what a live event would look like versus a virtual, and the steps that we take as we go through preparing, executing, and reporting. So when we're doing a live event, as well as with a virtual, our first step of the process is always to meet with our ripple effects mapping contact, whoever that may be. It might be a coalition, someone running a coalition. It could be someone within a community who is looking to better understand the events that are happening, whatever it may be. We meet with them first. And then at that point, if we're doing a live event, we're going to identify the facilitator, the mapper, and the transcriber. Sometimes in our live events, for example, when Lori and Deborah do them, they function as the facilitator and the mapper together. So you saw Deborah in the video where she was facilitating the conversation and also writing. What we have found is that when you're doing it online, it's very difficult to facilitate a conversation and type into the map the way I was doing into that digital map on Xmind. And so we have found that it's really necessary to have both a facilitator and a mapper. In person, it's often useful to have a transcriber who's writing down really good quotes and catching some of the conversation as they go. In the virtual setting, what we try to do is we ask people if they will permit us to record their conversation. And so we have a Zoom keeper. Oftentimes the person doing the digital mapping is also the Zoom keeper. They're sort of paying attention, making sure people are staying muted, sort of watching things as they go along, setting up breakout rooms, doing all of that. So you can have that person wear multiple hats. In a live session, we do try to record if we can, but sometimes the logistics just aren't there. And in that case, having a transcriber or note taker is very useful. We develop the questions both for live and virtual. In the live event, we don't send the questions to people out ahead of time. We wait until that day and share the questions at that time. However, with virtual, we have found that it's very beneficial for participants to receive the link details, obviously, as well as the appreciative inquiry questions or guiding questions, however we've labeled them, ahead of time. So we send them to the primary contact. You can see an example at the bottom of the screen. Dear Rose, we're looking forward to mapping TASBO's work this Tuesday at 1 p.m. This includes all the information. We'll include the Zoom link. We include a Word document so that people are able to print out the guiding questions and take notes on them. And we provide phone numbers in addition to the Zoom phone numbers so that people can call in case they don't have accessibility to a computer. And we use the primary contact to communicate all that information because they have a relationship with people. So the actual event logistics, if we're in a live setting, you saw the group of people around the map in that video. We do our best to be aware of and mitigate any ambient noise, especially if we're recording. We like to make sure that there's at least some blank space on the wall to hang our butcher block paper. And we like to turn it into an event. We try to build time in the schedule and space for food and or refreshments, at the very least having coffee and tea. Humans are social characters, like we like to gather. And so the more we can make it an event, the better it is. And then we always provide a sign-up sheet for attendees so that we have the opportunity to contact them later should the need arise with their email address and or their phone number. In the virtual setting, we always confirm at least once, if not twice, with the primary contact to make sure Zoom link details have been sent. Once the virtual setting, the logistics, ideally we like to try to assign pairs into Zoom breakout sessions. However, recently we've been doing a lot of mappings where the contact isn't always sure who's going to show up in the room. So sometimes we're creating breakout rooms on the fly. So you just have to sort of be prepared to act quite reactively as necessary. As Lori mentioned, we're always prepared to step into the rooms should the need when we initially start, just so that people are familiar, and we make sure we record the mapping session after we've received confirmation that that's okay. We've not run into the issue yet where someone has said, no, I don't feel comfortable recording. However, if we do, our plan at the time, we sort of thought it through ahead of time, would be to have that person participate in the mapping first. And then after they're done talking, then we would start the recording so that we could capture the rest of the mapping on recording. If the group itself didn't want to record, if it was a group thought, then of course we wouldn't record. However, most people seem to be comfortable, and we're very clear that we record just for transcription purposes, and we delete the recordings following. We often need to fill out institutional review board forms. Typically REMs fall into exempt status, and we're very clear that that's how we're making use of the data. And then we store it very carefully behind locked, password protected computers and so on and so forth. So those are the logistics. You can see a little bit of the difference between the two. During the appreciative inquiry interviews, this is kind of a little bit of the peek behind the scenes that we gave you. In a live session, we're going to provide a brief overview. We ask each person to kind of find a partner. We encourage them to not go with someone they know really well. If their partner is there or their best friend or someone they work with, we try to get people to separate. And we do that because it's just more interesting to talk to someone that you're not overly familiar with. And we have attendees interview each other, similar to what you guys just did. In the virtual setting, we do the breakout rooms ahead of time if possible. Like I said, not always possible. We explain to everyone how it works. We make sure that participants have either the printed questions in front of them. We always paste them in the chat box, and we sometimes have people jot them down in front of them on a piece of paper if they don't. During each of our breakout sessions, our facilitators, we usually have 2 to 3 per session, will jump into each room at the very beginning to make sure people understand what's going on. And then we usually give people about a 2 to 3 minute warning. So we'll often pop into the room just to make sure the conversation's proceeding as expected, let them know that they're going to get the 60-second breakout session ending in a couple minutes, and then we go back to the main room. We do this so people feel comfortable and in a safe space to share their story without us listening in. the actual process. In a live event, we do kind of a round robin sharing where one story per pair, and we go around so that everybody has the opportunity to speak. We also invite participants to add to each other's stories. The virtual setting, as a facilitator, we make sure that we write down participants' names and where they were in the breakout rooms so that we call on people. Keep in mind that with Zoom, when people turn their videos on and off, they will often move around the room. So you can't rely on your screen to be able to tell you exactly where people are. Write it down, cross them off, do whatever you want. Oftentimes for mapping sessions, we will, for the groups we've recently been working with, we actually don't put participants' names up on the screen. Instead, we'll use a code name. So we'll use P1 for the first participant that speaks, P2, P3, so on and so forth. And then on a piece of paper in front of me, I'll keep track of the name of the person and the participant number so that we have that for later. Again, round robin sharing. Make sure everyone has the opportunity to share and invite people to add to each other's stories as appropriate. So I want to give the opportunity to Deborah to talk a little bit through doing prompts, because prompts are a key critical piece to having a successful mapping.
Thank you very much. You know, I want to say that I was skeptical about how successful ripple mapping would be online, because as you saw from the video, I get fully engaged with the group. But it is a great tool, and because of all the reasons that you found valuable about Zoom with your COVID experience, getting more people in the room, they don't have to travel, they're in their comfortable place. But what we really need to do is prompt them and ask them to share their stories, just like you were in a live event. And it helps to think of some prompts ahead of time. Now, one thing about ripple mapping is we're never trying to steer them in a direction or give them leading prompts, but useful things about what happened and who was involved and how did it help your business. If you're working on a group with a group that's done a lot of grant writing, you can ask how much was the grant and are there others? So it's helping them think about the juicy little bits about their story and their experience that would help other people to think about what they're doing too. But I'm going to show you an example here about how you get to that really good piece about what has happened. So a group that talks about community leadership, I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of the fact that youth learned how to be leaders. One of the early prompts would be, what happened when those youth became leaders? And this is a true example. They listed out some things like created a youth council, wrote news articles, we did a community cleanup. And then a prompt after that is, how did it change and what is different in your community? And when people say out of their mouths, youth feel more connected to the community, that is a juicy bit that gives you chills and helps you with funders and stakeholders to say that this hard work that is very complicated is resulting in this kind of work. And it's really impactful and really empowering. It's a little bit of magic, so you're just going to need to practice and think about what your program areas are and what kind of prompts would be useful to you. I also want to share that when we're done with this, we want the group to do some reflection and closing on this. What do they say is the most significant change or impact? What patterns did they see? How can the information be used? In community development, we often work or code and move the conversation towards community capitals and having that conversation with them about how does it change the natural capital or financial capital, social or cultural. We also talk about, was anybody missing and is information missing? In the beginning, when we set this up, we make sure they understand this is a moment in time. It's not the end of an event or the end of everything. We want to collect all of the juicy things and all of the stories that they want to share. Another piece that people often ask us for is once we've had the event and everybody has shared these stories, what can you do with the information? As we mentioned, Carrie Backman wasn't able to join us today, but we did a ripple mapping event with her at Wakayokan County Extension and used these questions. What kind of impact has WSU Extension had in the community? And what makes you the most proudest of working with Extension? what's valued, and what programs have had economic impact. Now, she was specifically looking for economic impact for her county commissioners. So that's why we had that very specific question. And then when we took that data and put it together, like you saw Rebecca typing, we collected all that information and created one big, huge map. But then with XMind, which is the software that we use, you can peel it apart and cut and paste into separate different maps. And so she took all of the economic development outcomes associated with the County Marine Resources Committee and showed how these ripples were affected by that specific group. And then she took the youth development outcomes and showed the map on that. So what that was able to do is help those people that cared about the youth in their community to see what kind of economic impact they had. And those that care about the marine community could see that separate. The whole event, when we did it, those were all interconnected and sometimes back and forth. But when you start to sort that data and the stories that they tell, you can tell different kinds of stories to your funders and your stakeholders. I'm going to share another example of how I used my ripple effects mapping to tell a story that was a little complicated to tell. We had a new hunger coalition in our community, and at our gala fundraiser, people were still wondering why we had a coalition and what was it all about and what were we supposed to be doing. So I showed one of our kind of signature events was this Cool Pup trailer. This is something that we designed with the coalition, and we were using it to deliver food and produce out to our community. But to share the ripple effects that came out of an event, I built a PowerPoint, and you're going to see it all pulled together at one. But as I was speaking, these bubbles and ripples were popping up and showing how they were all interconnected and how they built on each other. And so they could see that starting the trailer and working with a funder has resulted in all of these kinds of steps. And I will just brag a little bit. After this presentation, in 10 minutes, we raised enough money, $14,000, to buy a whole nother Cool Pup trailer, because they could see how the action of what they had done before created all these ripple effects in the community that they didn't know about. And that was the Hunger Coalition members that told that kind of story. So all of these things can happen virtually and at live events. It's learning how to take those stories and tell that story that it all creates. And I'm going to let Rebecca now talk through. This is still me. She's nodding her head. Okay. I've got my numbering wrong. Sorry. So this is the coalition right here. This is the group of people that got together and started working on this work. And when we did the ripple effect map with them, one of the quotes that they came up with was, "We used to be afraid of each other and now we aren't." So this event that they're sitting at, this was pre-COVID, but they are all showing off checks that they received from a funder. Prior to the coalition, I think they would have been happy to take their checks and go home, but they were very happy to celebrate that all together as a coalition. And so having them be able to tell that story is really impactful and powerful. Now I'm done, Rebecca.
So Lori, do you want me to stop sharing my screen now so that you can bring this up on yours?
Yeah. And this is the edited version of the map that I showed earlier from Motor Cities. Now with XMind, what I could demonstrate how there's a presentation mode where you can actually go into the map and have it scroll around the map semi-automatically, so you can show up. But I'm just going to do a couple of examples here of what we did with Motor Cities and how you can add quotes and images to the map. So Motor Cities National Heritage Area, part of that is the heritage areas is they create these stewardship communities, and there's one in it's collaborative groups in different communities in the same heritage area. And this particular one was out of Lansing, and their claim to fame was the RE Oldsmobile plant. And so that's the cars that they built. And one of the first stories they talked about was an oral history project, and how they started capturing stories about what happened when a plant closed, a new plant was being built, and somebody's job when they were part of this job bank was to start collecting some of the stories. So they had these interviews, and then somebody in the stewardship community asked about the interviews and said, hey, where are the pictures to go with the interviews? And then this was a photographer that asked the question, and he got the job of actually taking the portraits to go with the interviews for the oral history. And he said, you can never ask John a question without getting a good job of it out of it. And you can see that particular ripple really rippled out. There's multiple levels here, and really got embedded in the local university, and the university is really taking advantage of that opportunity to teach students about a lot of different things. All of these images were ones that I went online and found that were examples of the things that they talked about. Not every project is going to be like that. Sometimes you have to work with the group that you're ripple mapping to get the photographs, and that can be easy or difficult. It just depends on the group, and also how tech savvy they are about sending pictures. So that's another ripple. And then gold star to the person that recognizes what this car is called. And I'll give you a hint. It's the name of a band. Let's see. Anybody get that yet? You can put it in the chat or chime in. REO Speedwagon, Kurt. Yeah, but Kurt, weren't you there when we ripple mapped the Motor Cities group?
I was not.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. Or did you see this when we...
No, I didn't see it. I just guessed it.
Well, 2 gold stars for you then. I thought I was gonna accuse Kurt of cheating, but he didn't. Yeah, REO Speedwagon, Neil Doughty, I think saw the name on a blackboard in a college history of transportation class, and that's why they named their band REO Speedwagon. They were in Illinois, not even in Michigan, by the way. So anyway, this is just an example of what you can do with the maps. I really like adding quotes to maps because I think it really brings the material alive. And then I think that's particularly helpful when it goes back to the group that you're ripple mapping, and they can see their actual words and not just this happened, but they can see their words, and it really does kind of convey the kinds of transformations, the kinds of profound impacts and changes that they described during the ripple mapping process.
Lori, Vikram posted in the chat box, he was wondering whether, and now my chat just disappeared on me, whether you can do different tabs for different projects in Xmind.
Yeah, if I understand what you're saying, I can't show you the other maps that are in my, but these are different tabs up at the top. So yeah.
And Vikram, what we will sometimes do, similar to what what Deborah was showing with the Wakayacom example, is we will take a ripple or 2 ripples or a theme and create a map of just that. And so then when we're sharing back with the client, we will share the overall map, but sometimes we'll also share multiple individual maps that are especially relevant to the client, so that they don't necessarily, I mean, sometimes the overall map is a little overwhelming because it contains so much information. And so what we have found is that by rippling out just one, whether it's by theme or by a participant, whatever it may be, that's a useful way for them to be able to more easily digest the information. Scott Chasden at the University of Minnesota will also do follow-up ripple effects mappings with groups, and he will take those same ripples, like a single ripple, and print it out on a large piece of paper and then have people respond to that. So that's another way to do a ripple effects mapping with data that's already been done, taking out a single ripple in XMind and providing it for people to respond to. So that's definitely possible to do. And that's one of the advantages of XMind, is it lets you move things around relatively easily and save multiple tabs at a time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. All right. So with that, we are nearing the end. So I wanted to share my screen one last time over here. It's worked every time. Let's hope it does one last time today. Here we go. So just a little bit of a final reflection on our end, to say that one of the reasons we are so excited about ripple effects mapping and frequently present about it and talk and train and build capacity around the country is that it's so very, very flexible. We have found that it can be used both in person and online. At this point, we've done upwards, and when I say we, I'm speaking particularly on a project that Lori, Deborah, and myself are working on. We've done close to 15 online ripple effects mappings with tribal members in different communities around the country. We've done organizations at different nonprofit organizations. And so I don't know what Lori's total is, but I can tell you that we are upwards of doing quite a number over the last year and a half. And I think it was Jody posted in the chat sort of this, you know, things that are born of necessity. And that was what we found. Ripple effects mapping has always been done in person, and it's been used in multiple settings and with various types of participants. And so it was both unnerving and exciting to kind of explore a new way of doing ripple effects mapping. And we feel relatively confident each time we've done it. We've learned something a little bit more. Our first couple compared to now were a little more rough when it comes to the smoothness of the process. But as Lori mentioned in the very beginning, it's very unusual for us to have every single person on a computer. Quite often we have people calling in addition to using their computer or their iPad, and yet we still make it work. We are very verbally engaging with everybody who's there. And that certainly helps the process and the situation. Most recently, we've been able to do ripple effects mapping with youth. I think our youngest so far has been 8, I believe, we had recently on the mapping. And you know, sometimes the youth are a little more adept at moving things around online than even their parents. And so that's been, you know, been very successful. And again, sort of to bring this around full circle, what this tool allows us to do is to document the intended and unintended effects of a program, a project, within a community, a coalition, and a system, however it may work. So with that, that was kind of what we put together today. We wanted to make sure we left some time for questions. And I see
Rebecca, I'm going to add to that one thing that we have found with virtual that we never experienced necessarily in person was the field trip. We've actually had participants with their phone or iPad walking around and showing us things that have been part of the project or program that we're evaluating. So It's been kind of fun to just have people just take us out and show us what they're talking about. And we don't often get that opportunity or think about, hey, let's take a field trip as part of this ripple mapping. So that's been one benefit that I've seen that we never had with in-person.
So Ellen asked what size of group works best for virtual mapping. We have found that the max limit is about 12. So in person, our rule of thumb is anywhere from 12 to 15. And that typically you can accomplish in person that in about 90 minutes to 2 hours. Depending upon how talkative people are in virtual, we can get in about 12, 13 at the most, and then it exceeds 2 hours, and people are at that point sort of reaching the limits of their ability to, including myself, pay attention and be engaging. And so most of our mappings, when we schedule them, we ask for people to reserve at least 90 minutes, and we try to do our very best to shut down at 2 hours. And those 12. Marilyn asked, how has the community used the information gleaned from the ripple effects mapping? Deborah, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure. When I do ripple mapping with a community, I always want to find out what they want to do with the information. And so I talked a little bit about the Hunger Coalition. I've also been doing some work with a creative district in one of our towns, and they needed to be able to document and articulate the creative work that they had already done to date so that they could apply for grants. So when we started looking at the information, we really did the prompting about what was great about the specific project that made them unique to this grant application. Instead of saying things as simple as we did an event, they could talk about we did this event with this many partners and this many kinds of people involved, and could really tease out those details. They took their ripple effect map and printed it out as large as they possibly could, and they put it up at the newspaper in the window because it's a small town and people walk by. So they could show that that's some work that they had done. There's lots of different ways you can use it. If you think visually how people might access that information, you might put them in different size maps, add all those photographs and quotes that Lori showed you. Really draws people into a little bit mind-numbing mind map when it's just text. So I would encourage you to look at making it creative work of art. I can't remember who was talking about painting during the COVID, but thinking visually about how this appeals to people, and including the stories that are on the map.
And Marilyn, also just to sort of continue with what Deborah was saying, making sure that we're very clear with what the community or the organization is looking to obtain, because that will dictate the types of questions, the direction of your questions, as well as what your prompts are. So it becomes a very intentional and specific and directed towards whatever avenue they want to go.
I think one of the biggest ways communities use the information is when they're in the ripple mapping and they see the map. And this is in particular when it's in person, because as you can see, it's really difficult to see everything that's on the map at once when you're online, once you really start filling it out. But just seeing everything that has been done. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I had no idea that we did that much. You know, we have really accomplished a lot because, you know, everybody's doing different things and they're never seeing it all in one place. So I think that benefit alone is just pretty profound, I think, for communities that have experienced this.
Yeah, so I'll close my comments with one quote that I got from someone, that it's a powerful tool on many levels, including keeping us fired up about the good work that we do. And so from my experience, community development work, community work at all, is challenging and complex and keeps on going. So this is a moment of time to celebrate and say, look, this is what we're doing. Let's keep going.
All right, so it is just a minute left. I'm assuming that if anyone has any other questions, they of course always can reach out to Deborah, Lori, and myself. Our contact information and names are located, well, at least our names, if nothing else, are located in the presentation, and we can be found easily online, either at WSU Extension or University of Idaho. So thank you everybody for coming and participating and playing along with us. We hope that you picked up some new information today, and we appreciate having the opportunity to speak our ripple effects mapping excitement. It's always fun to be able to share it with more people. So thank you.
And don't forget to go join your new president, Melinda Grismer, for a social hour.